Hello, and welcome to the Adolescent DBT Parent and Guardian Psychoeducation Program. My name is Ashley, and I am a licensed independent clinical social worker. I've been providing therapy for teens and adults at MHS for the past 5 years. The purpose of this video is to provide the adults of the teens who we see in our DBT program with information about our program, both how it works and learning the skills that the teens are learning in group, both so that you can support their skill use and so that you can use these skills for yourself in your own life. Today's video is going to focus on the skill of validation. This word gets used in DBT a little bit differently, I think, than what people mean when they say it out in the world. So let's talk about what DBT's definition of validation is. Validation as a skill is a way of communicating that you understand what somebody's experiencing in a given moment. This includes acknowledging what their emotional state is, whether they're feeling happy or sad or scared or worried or excited, what you think that their emotions are in that moment. It also can be acknowledging what their thoughts are, what they're thinking about. How are they interpreting a current moment or situation? What are their opinions about what's going on? Do they like it? Do they not like it? Do they wish things would happen differently? Do they think things should be handled differently? Also, are they thinking about any past events or memories in the current moment that could be affecting how they're engaging with it right now? It can include acknowledging beliefs, so what they believe to be true about themselves, whether they're capable or incapable or worthy or unworthy. What they believe about other people. Are other people generally helpful, caring, or less helpful and less caring? What do they believe about the world? Is it generally a safe and predictable place, or is it generally pretty chaotic and scary? Validation also means acknowledging people's behaviors. So what you can physically see, are they smiling? Are they crying? Are they throwing something or yelling? What are the words that they're using to communicate with you, and how are they saying it? Are they speaking softly? Are they speaking loudly, fastly, slowly? Things like that. Validating statements can acknowledge each of these separately, or they can acknowledge a combination of them. So I might say, as a validating statement, you seem to be fidgeting a lot. Are you feeling anxious? So there I'm acknowledging what the behavior is I see and making a guess about what the emotion might be that's leading to that behavior. Validation as a skill serves a few different purposes. The first is building healthy relationships. It's part of our interpersonal effectiveness module that helps us build relationships both with ourselves and with other people and get our needs and wants met more regularly. The give skill is the skill that focuses on what other people need in a relationship. So it's the other focused side of the dialectic. Validation can help increase our sense of connection in the relationship. When I see that somebody's trying to understand my experience, I feel more connected to them. It also helps somebody feel understood when I can express, I see why you're anxious. That makes sense to me. I can feel understood by somebody who's important to me. And when I can see that people are making an effort to understand me, I know that I'm important and that my experience matters to them. So it helps me feel valued in a relationship. Validation can reduce defensiveness between people in a relationship. So it communicates that I just want to understand. I don't need you to defend your position or explain yourself to me. It also helps at avoiding escalating conflicts. Validation is a useful conflict resolution tool. When we're on the same page, we can problem solve together. And it just avoids matching behaviors and escalating any problems that might be occurring. When we validate, it can also help us align together with the other person rather than arguing about what the best response is or blaming each other for what's happening. We're really trying to understand where the other person is coming from. Validation is a skill that can be used in almost any interaction with any other person or with any interaction, including yourself. it is really helpful to practice validating what your own experience is. Telling yourself it makes sense why you're thinking or feeling the way you are in any given moment based on what you've been through in the past can help you validate other people as well. Validation is a useful skill when we're trying to understand others. So if we're feeling confused by why somebody's doing or saying the things that they are, validation can help us understand what's going on for them that's leading to these behaviors or leading to them saying these things. As mentioned previously, validation is useful when there's conflict or disagreement. Rather than fighting each other, we can understand each other and get on the same page. It also helps to validate prior to setting or reinforcing boundaries with somebody. We can validate why somebody might have done or said something that they did and still set a boundary that we need them to do something differently in the future. This slide is a list of ways that people tend to respond that aren't necessarily good or bad things to do in and of themselves, and they're not validation. So oftentimes these ways of responding do come from an effort to validate. They're coming from an effort to create connection. And sometimes they work and sometimes they do some things that are not so helpful if that's our goal. The first two, agreeing and disagreeing, or approving and disapproving, are often ways that we try to set boundaries with people. So saying that somebody's thoughts, feelings, or behaviors are right or wrong, or okay or not okay, appropriate or inappropriate ways to respond, often are us trying to set boundaries with other people. Problem solving is often suggestions when somebody comes to us with an experience for how to fix their thoughts, like just try to look on the bright side, try to fix their feelings, just calm down, right? We're trying to be helpful. We see that there is some issue going on and we want them to feel relief from that problem. So we're trying to offer things that we think might work. So well-intentioned. Oftentimes what ends up happening is lots of people already know what solutions are possible for their situation. And they need somebody to validate what they're going through before they can actually implement those strategies. Validation also does not mean taking on somebody's emotions. So if I have a friend whose pet is in the vet hospital, right, they can come to me and I don't need to be as worried about their pet as they are. I can express understanding why they might be worried. And I don't need to kind of go on about, well, what might be wrong or what are they doing? And getting as upset as they are. What that does is then put the focus on me and my emotions rather than focusing on the other person and what they're experiencing. And if I'm trying to use validation, I'm trying to keep my attention on the other person's experience. Validation is also not encouragement. Again, a lot of times this comes from a really kind-hearted place. We believe in other people. We see that they're strong and capable, and we want them to see that too. So we offer encouraging statements. This is sometimes helpful. If I don't validate how hard the experience is first, it can come off as dismissive, right? So saying it's not that big of a deal, they can do it, we know they can. There's kind of communicates there's no reason to be upset right now. Validation also is not personalization, so sharing our own similar experiences with something. Again, this often comes from a kind-hearted place. We want to communicate that people aren't alone, that we understand what they're going through because we've experienced the same things. Personalization can pair really well with validation in small doses, as long as we put the focus back on the other person after we share that we've had a similar experience. So if my friend comes to me again with the pet in the vet hospital, I don't want to then say, oh, I remember when my dog was sick, I was so worried I couldn't sleep at night. I was worried it would cost a lot of money and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. We had to do all these testing. Again, now I'm putting the attention on me and my past experience rather than focusing the attention on the person in front of me and what they're going through right now. So the next slide will have some examples of this. Here's a situation. A child states that they aren't doing their homework because there's too much to do. Take a second, think if you've ever heard your teen say this. I know in a teen group that was a common statement or issue that teens had. So if I were responding with agreeing or disagreeing, I might just say, you're right, there is too much to do. They should assign less work. Or there's not too much to do, you just need to start. Approval or disapproval, it's okay to not do your homework if it's too much. If you can't handle it, just don't do it. Or it's not okay to just not do your homework. You have to do it no matter what. Problem solving would be offering a suggestion right away. Let's call your teacher and see if we can get you an extension. Taking on distress would be responding, it is way too much. I can't believe how much they're assigning. Don't they know how much else you're managing? I can't help you keep up with this. I've got other things to do too, right? So now I'm escalating the situation. Providing encouragement would be, you're really smart. I know you can do it if you just try. And personalization would be, I remember how much work was assigned in school. I had a really hard time keeping up too. I just did what I could and teachers were willing to help me and eventually it all worked out, right? So I'm sharing my past experience that was similar. Okay, so if these statements are not validation, then let's talk about what we can do to increase our validating. And the first step is to observe our own patterns. Chances are, as I read through those, you recognized one or two that maybe you tend to lean on first. All of us have ways of responding that come more naturally or more habitual to us. So take a second to think, do you have a tendency to jump right into problem solving? Are you a fixer? Do you have a tendency to provide encouragement right away? Then think about what you're trying to achieve. Usually, as I said, we're trying to achieve connection or maintain boundaries by these other ways of responding. So identifying what your goal is can help you decide if validation is going to meet that need maybe more effectively, or validation first will help you get to the problem solving afterwards. And that's the last bullet point here, is that all of these ways of responding may be helpful for different situations, and all of them are probably going to be supported by validation first. So I can acknowledge the experience first, get on the same page with them, and then we can move on to what we need to do after that. As far as the process of how to validate, we use our mindfulness skills. So focus first on noticing what the other person is communicating to you. This can be focusing specifically on their words. I hear you say you feel sad today. Or, so you think we should try to do it this way. So you think you should be able to play video games when you get home from school before doing your homework. You can also notice what their body language is communicating. As the example I listed earlier, I notice you're fidgeting a lot. You're having a hard time sitting still. Are you feeling anxious? Right? Noticing facial expressions. You are furrowing your brow. Are you mad? Right? You can also just make a direct observation of what you think their emotions are in this moment. So you seem frustrated and taking a guess at what you might be feeling in that moment. It's helpful to consider what you know about the person's past that may be contributing to their current experience. The idea is that given what somebody's been through, it makes sense for them to have an emotion in this moment. So knowing that they have a pattern of feeling overwhelmed when they get too much work assigned helps you understand that they might be feeling overwhelmed in this moment. It's also okay to ask questions to increase your understanding or clarify. We can practice curiosity rather than making assumptions that you know for sure what another person is experiencing. And it's okay for the person to correct it or clarify as needed. Remember that we're all the experts in our own experiences. So if you guess the wrong emotion, it's not that you did something wrong. It's that there's a whole lot going on that we don't necessarily get to know about somebody else's experience unless they tell us. I see this a lot with teens and parents about isolation. Often parents are very concerned about isolation, rightfully so. Lots of our teens have safety concerns or high depression symptoms, and isolation can be an indication of that. And sometimes teens just need alone space. If they're spending time in their room, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a depression behavior. So allowing people to clarify what's going on for them is really helpful for validation. So in the previous example of the kid who wasn't doing their homework, validation may sound like, I hear you're feeling overwhelmed with school. I remember that you can feel frustrated when you're having a hard time keeping up. Is that how you're feeling now? So I heard that they're overwhelmed because they said there's too much to do, right? They can't keep up. I know that in the past, that's been really frustrating for them. They like to be able to maintain their work. So using that knowledge, I'm guessing that that's how they're feeling now. But I'm letting them correct me. They might say, yeah, I am feeling really frustrated. And then we can talk about how do you manage frustration versus just giving up. And if it's not that, maybe they say, no, I'm just really tired. I need to take a nap before I can go do the homework. And that's a totally different solution than thinking that you're problem solving. Okay. So more examples. Are these statements validation? Somebody comes to me and says, oh, she hates me. She never returns any of my texts. And the response is, well, maybe you should talk with her about it. Maybe invite her out to lunch. This is not validation. This is problem solving. You're often offering suggestions. Talk it out, see if she really likes you. Maybe lunch is a good time and place to do that. The initial statement, I really don't like when you ask me too many questions. Response, I hear what you're saying. Can you tell me more specifically what you mean? What kinds of questions don't you like? This is validation. I'm paying attention to what the person is telling me, and I'm asking for more clarification because I'm not sure what exactly it is they're talking about. Oh, I'm so sick of work. I'm just going to quit my job and move to California. And your response is, great idea, stay in touch. That's not validation. It's just agreeing. Like, yep, good idea. I agree with you. Go do that. The initial statement is, I just can't do anything right. And the response is, you're going to be okay. Look at the bright side. You're such a great musician. That's something you can do right. Again, not validation. It's an example of an encouraging statement. My homework is so hard this semester. It sounds like these classes are harder for you than last year. That is validation. I'm focusing on what the person is saying, actually using their words. This is hard, and making a guess in comparison to last year. You're having a harder time with keeping up than you were last year, or the content is more difficult for you. And the last example is, oh, I was so angry at her that I just left. My response is, well, you shouldn't just walk out on people. That's not validation, that's disapproval. You did something that I don't think is right. Again, there is, in the two examples of validation, I am not saying that I agree or disagree with what they're telling me, right? I'm not saying that I am asking too many questions. I'm just saying I'd like to know and understand more about what kinds of questions feel like too many, right? Can you tell me more about what's going on here so that we can find a solution? And I'm also not saying that I agree that the homework is hard, right? I don't know what that person's experience, I don't know better than that person what their experience of difficulty is. If they're saying that the homework is really hard this semester, I'm just trusting that they know what their experience is better than my interpretation. Okay. So, validation can be really hard to practice, and there are a few common barriers to responding with validation. The first one is that it may feel awkward as we practice it. We aren't typically focused on just reflecting back what people are communicating to us, or reflecting back that we understand. So it may just feel uncomfortable for you to do it at first. The way to work through this barrier is to keep practicing it, and over time you'll likely find ways to validate that feel more authentic to you, or you'll just get more comfortable with the act of validation as you do it more. So maybe your validation statements don't change, but you feel more comfortable with them as you do them over and over again. The second barrier can be it's really ingrained habits. I'm just really used to responding with encouragement, and it's hard to stop that because that's my automatic response. So the way we overcome that barrier is to practice mindfulness, to be aware of and intentional about our responses. If I want to practice validation, knowing that I have a tendency to offer encouragement And replacing that with a validation statement on purpose can be really helpful. Also, you may be experiencing heightened emotions that make it hard to validate. If I'm feeling really excited, I'm going to be focused on the thing that I'm excited about and less able to focus on what somebody else's experience is in the moment. The same thing with anger, frustration, anxiety. More heightened my emotions are, the more I'm going to be focused on them, and it's going to be harder for me to validate somebody else. So the way to work around that barrier is to really engage in emotional self-care. Take time for yourself, process your feelings, take breaks if you need to, and try to identify some validating statements that you can use for common behaviors of those around you. So if you know to expect that your kid has a hard time completing homework, for example, having some validating statements that you've pre-thought of, so when that comes up, you can respond with validation, even if you're feeling really frustrated that they're not doing their homework again. The last barrier is fear of reinforcing ineffective behaviors. A lot of times it's hard for us to validate because we don't want to send a message that what somebody is doing is okay, right? For somebody to throw things in when they're angry may not be okay with us. And we don't want to say, wow, you must have been really angry to throw that, because we fear that we're giving permission. And as we talked about earlier, first doing the validation, wow, you must have been really angry, allows us to express understanding and not judgment of the person for doing it, and then follow it up with, we need to find some other ways for you to express anger because you can't throw stuff here, right? So now I'm able to problem solve because I've done the validation first. And it might take a few more sentences of validation to get to problem solving, but it's going to be more helpful to do that first if I want to have a conversation about boundaries. Okay, so in summary, validation is simply understanding a person's experience without judgment. This can apply to yourself, this can apply to other people, and that it helps to build healthy relationships. The last point is it takes practice. Practice with people as much as you can. Also, some group members will practice with like watching movies and trying to come up with something that they would say to validate a character in a TV show or the movie or something that they're watching, to get practice with the phrasing of it when there's not a pressure or intense emotion response happening for them. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation today. Thank you for your participation and watching all the way through. I encourage you to, again, think about what your own patterns are, go out and practice the skill and see how it goes. And then remember to attend the monthly question and answer portion of the Parent and Guardian program. This part allows you to ask questions of a facilitator, to hear how other parents and guardians are using these skills with their teams, or how other teams are using these skills, and you can support that. The information for these meetings gets sent out monthly, so contact your team's group facilitator if you haven't gotten the information, or if you need it resent. Thank you and take care.